for me, the question is just like, what makes us better positioned today to figure these things out than the people who actually sat at the feet of the apostles and listened to their teachings? Like, how can we be certain that we're the ones interpreting things based on little selection of books instead of looking at the full context of what was actually happening?
So read the scriptures, search the scriptures, do that. But if that doesn't translate into a real heartfelt experience, then it's all just head knowledge.
Dad, we are back for a continuation of just a couple, 2 weeks ago, we recorded a conversation about an Orthodox son talks to his Protestant
Oh,
dad about the church and religion. And apparently, it seems like a lot of people were interested in the conversation, appreciate it. I've had a lot of people commenting me, people who know me actually, who saw it and got a lot out of it. So we decided to go even deeper this time and to talk about this dangerous and yeah, big important subject, I think, as well.
Yeah, it seems to be something that's tickled an interest amongst a number of people. And again, we trust that it'll allow fathers and sons to chat and communicate. Very
Yeah,
important.
I think that there's definitely so many people who have seen a generational gap in
Mm.
beliefs and understandings of the world and existence, and some often very foundational beliefs that are challenged. Just in my little network here, I have like 17, 18-year-old guys who like get like, either forbidden to go to church by their parents, who
Oh,
think they're
hmm.
getting indoctrinated or becoming a spy for Vladimir Putin, perhaps, or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, or often just, very anti-Christian sentiment. And also then people who have just parents who are Christians but in different denominations and are not able to talk about the differences without people getting upset and hurt and so it seems like there's a need for having these conversations more in a spirit of reconciliation and understanding without while still holding on to that there are differences that are important, I guess, right?
Yeah, an acknowledging of that and a respect, I think, is maybe something that we need to try and encourage. That,
Yeah.
yeah, and I suppose, yeah, the Bible puts it, children, respect your parents, honor your parents, and I think if that honor is there, then the respect will be there, and then the discussions can be had without them becoming, flare-ups.
Yeah. So, Dad, maybe we could just talk a little bit about. I haven't asked you so far, like the way that, for us, I also kind of feel like there was a difficulty of how to really connect on this issue. And one of the
Yes.
challenges for me is that I think, as a kind of maybe a person that's tended towards a little bit of pride, then I've often had an idea that, I need to tell my dad the way things are supposed to be, kind of thing. And then coming into Christianity and realizing this passion of myself that I've had, then, seeing that we have different understandings of the church and how to actually live a Christian life. It's been difficult for me to know how to approach it and how to talk to you about it while still allowing you to be my dad and and
Yeah.
and having an appropriate level of respect. Sometimes I think I've swung way too hard and even been disrespectful as well. And then I've otherwise sometimes withdrawn and not been able to speak about it. So
Yeah.
for me, something that happened that I think actually really was great, and I'd be interested in hearing your perspective on that, is seems like there was a kind of a switch that happened where at some point I was kind of like prodding you for quite some time about talking more about this church. And then at some point you said, well, Paul, um, actually, I don't want to offend you. And I think you spent quite a bit of time saying you don't want to offend me, but, I see these really big problems with the church that you're attending.
Mm.
And I think it seems to me like you were very scared that it would cause some kind of rupture or something like that when you wrote that. And actually, for me, I kind of had the feeling that's what opened up the conversation,
Uh,
and created that possibility when you wrote like some of the big challenges you see in the Orthodox approach and kind of way of worship and all that kind of thing. So
yeah, and I think the whole idea can be one-upmanship, and that's kind of what I think we've overcome, and we've avoided this attempt at one-upmanship. And it's
mm,
okay, so we can have the discussion without wanting to like win a court battle, if you know what I mean.
mm,
We can just talk about it and let it be.
yeah, yeah, and I can certainly see like I've had more of a desire to make you understand my decisions than to understand where you're coming from. That's been my focus. And I think, and I have to admit, Dad, it still is to a certain extent. I have to consciously make myself want to understand where you're coming from, because I think when it comes to like having a revelation of Christ and having a revelation of the church, then I think both you and me feel like, we've really looked at these things to the deepest possible level, and we've understood something that feels God-given, right? And so
Yeah.
therefore, it's difficult to allow wiggle room or something like that of like really listening to the other. Is there something like that?
Yeah, it is something like that. And, for me particularly, I feel that I've come out of something very similar to what you're currently involved in.
Yeah.
And that makes it even more challenging for me to say, okay, it is different, but it's more challenging. For you, of course, you've come into something that is fresh and stirring and fulfilling for you, and you've really felt this is it. And I can understand that as well. So,
Yeah. 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 You grew up Roman Catholic, and
that's
left
right.
that church as a young man, to
Yeah.
become a Pentecostal Christian, or kind of a church with Pentecostal roots, we could say,
Yes.
perhaps. Yeah. So maybe, Dadlin, let's dive into that. And can you tell me a little bit about like the particular the particularity of the way that you view how the church should be, like the way that your guys' church is built up? It's a very special church in many ways, and one that we touched on in our last conversation that I really can admire for many aspects. But like how you've kind of like made those decisions. I know that Watchman Nee is an author and a thinker who's also really influenced your way of thinking about what a church is. So I don't know if you want to start with him or start with the Assemblies of God and Coastal Assemblies that where that you're part of, and how that kind of structure of how a church should look like and operate um, works.
Yeah. So the whole thing about coastal assemblies is that the plan or the thought of the whole concept was that there were kind of groups within groups. So kind of looking at the New Testament, there seemed to be Paul saying he's got a ministry particularly to the Gentile churches. Peter particularly has a ministry to the Jewish churches. And it seemed as if though they were united, and yet they were operating in slightly different understandings and perspectives and so on. And yet
Hmm.
there was a togetherness in that. So coastal assemblies was a part of an overall umbrella of the Assemblies of God,
Hmm.
where perhaps we were a little bit more conservative than what the Assemblies of God were in general.
Hmm.
Um, and the whole idea was that there are gifts that are given to men, and those are not gifts that you can earn by going to a college or getting a degree or getting a qualification of sort. We kind of again looked at the apostles, and we saw that Peter and his men, they were fishermen, and they were given a gift of being
Hmm.
able to take their place.
Yeah.
So we've put far more emphasis on what we believe to be the gifting of a person than what we would put on the academic qualifications of a person.
Yeah.
And that then kind of brings about a more flat structure, if I might say so,
Yeah.
so that we don't particularly see a very strong pyramid structure, except that we see God, man, woman in the church. But
Hmm.
as far as men in the church is concerned, we see very much of an equality and yet a difference because the gifts are different.
Do you think that's the same issue? Like, because I would definitely go along with you in, and I think most Orthodox, certainly in the Orthodox Church, there can be a tendency towards like people getting university education to become a priest.
Mm.
But I would personally say my journey into Orthodoxy has been a lot about unlearning kind of Western intellectualism and academic understanding.
Yes.
And so certainly go along with that in saying like that university level learning doesn't qualify one to have a higher position in a church or anything like that. But I would still say that even looking at the early church, there was a very clear hierarchy of authority, and there was levels of authority, and even very very early on, we saw the creation of the class of deacons, which was an intermediary hierarchical level as well between the kind of the apostles and the rest of the lay people. So would you, I don't know, trying to would you say that those things are two of the same things, the intellectual learning and the levels of hierarchy, or not?
In certain circles, that maybe that'll be the case, but not necessarily, as you say, in your
Yeah,
case, because you guys have priests that haven't done any particular studies or qualifications and so on.
yeah,
Um, so it's just, um, again, where I've come from, a man had to go to a seminary to be a priest. You couldn't
yeah,
do it any other way.
yeah,
Um, Whereas what we're saying, how we don't even feel that there are priests in the New Testament. We feel
yeah,
that the priests were in the Old. The priest that we see in the New Testament is the Lord Jesus, and then the Scripture speaks about all of us as being believer priests.
yeah.
So, yeah, there is a certain hierarchy when but it's not so much of a dominant kind of hierarchy. And
No.
even the
Yeah.
deacons, I would see as not being part of a hierarchy. I see the deacons as being appointed to serve.
Hmm.
And they didn't particularly have authority or such. They had a wonderful opportunity to just serve the body,
Yeah,
and they took
like the example of
responsibility for
Christ
it.
washing the feet of his of his apostles and
Disciples
saying, "He who will be the
will
great among you should be the
be the
lowest." And
least.
yeah,
Yeah,
so I fully agree, and it's actually I've only had the opportunity. There's one bishop I've had the opportunity of getting to know a little bit, and then two that I've met a couple of times, and it seems to me absolutely that these are men of incredible humility and service. So when we
yeah,
talk about hierarchy, I think it is a hierarchy of something like self-sacrificing service, but there's still an authority which also ensures some kind of fidelity, um, so that there's a point of responsibility for maintaining boundaries somehow,
mm,
right?
mm.
Because that service also includes protection, and going to the going into the breach for. So,
For someone
and where I
else.
also would say again, like, in my theology studies, it's been underlined again and again, like, you don't study theology by reading books. You study theology by living the liturgical life and by allowing these ideas to enter into your heart and taking them into your prayers, and through, the purification. So that's the important part of it. That's how
Mm,
you come
mm,
to know. I think what you experienced was a result of scholasticism, which was a movement that really came with Thomas Aquinas and the integration of Greek philosophy, Aristotle's ideas into Christianity. That suddenly the idea that you came to know God through learning, and that's been thoroughly
mm,
rejected. There was a guy called Saint Gregory Palamas who lived in, I think, the 13th century, who really stood for rejecting that entire way of thinking in the Orthodox Church, and said, God is experienced firsthand as light, first of all, and it's something you can attain to through purifying your own heart, not so much just through academic learning. Um,
yeah, yeah. I'm glad you said academic learning because I think there is a learning that is necessary that we all have. There's a
mhm,
learning by experience, and
yeah,
the Lord Jesus Himself says, "Learn of me."
mm,
So there is a learning, and that does involve these minds of ours, and does involve us, searching and reading. But ultimately, it's a heartfelt experience, and and if that's not there, in other words, these ought you to do, but not to leave the other undone, kind of idea. So read the scriptures, search the scriptures, do that. But if that doesn't translate into a real heartfelt experience, then it's all just head knowledge.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so I think we're very, and I think the key word for me is definitely heart there. Like
Yeah.
knowing Bible chapter and verse quotations left and right is very useful, but if it's not going down into my heart, then it's useless, right? Or it can
Yes.
even be dangerous for me.
Yeah.
Um,
Because I think
so
the danger of that then is using things out of context.
mhm,
And then you just use the academic statement of the scriptures, and then you can
yeah,
become condemning
yeah,
and
yeah,
judgmental.
absolutely, yeah. So I think we agree then that about the learning side of things, but then we're still not quietly aligned on then is the idea of authority, I guess, authority and maybe authoritative. Like, I know that you would say, well, the Bible is the authority, right?
Mm,
Um, but then
And men have authority, yes.
Yeah, and then men have authority. Yeah, and men differ in their understandings of the Bible. And at the end of the day, authority, I actually looked up the definition of the word. It's about making judgments.
Mm,
And a judgment is something that you need a person to make. Like a book can't make a judgment, right?
mhm,
So a Bible, the Bible just is, and and you can find plenty. So what, the very first heresy in the Christian church was called Arianism. It's the belief that Jesus Christ was much more a human than God.
mm.
So, for example, that he wasn't considered to be uncreated. He was considered to be, born in time or created in time. And there's plenty of verses in the Bible one can find to support the Arian position, right? And they had strong verses with, well, Jesus says himself he doesn't know when the second coming will be happening, for example, right? So
Mm,
he's not
mm.
equal with the Father and things like that, right? And so we have an understanding today of why that wasn't the truth, but the fact of the matter is that, especially being very far removed from the Bible, then different men read the Bible and come up with different understandings of it.
Yeah, and I suppose that's just the heart of man and the reality of man.
Yeah.
And uh, to talk about it. Okay, we do have a different understanding, but why? Where does it come from? So I think
Hmm.
early on, when you first started sort of asking some questions, I sort of asked you, well, why do you want to have these discussions? Do you want to have the discussions to kind of prove me wrong, or do you want to have the discussions to understand where we're coming from?
Hmm.
And if we have the discussions to say, oh, okay, I'm to understand where you're coming from, then the discussion's open.
Yeah. So how do you get to the because so one of the things you mentioned on the last conversation then was that you don't believe that in the idea of an overseer that has a multi-parish jurisdiction, right?
Mm. Hmm.
So does that come from a belief that that's what the early church didn't have, or where does that idea come from, or how did you land? Why did you guys land on that idea?
Yeah, so the whole concept of talking about elders, and elders also seem to be seen as overseers, bishops. So we
Yeah,
don't see in the scripture a bishop being appointed over an area. What we see is local churches with elders. So
yeah.
that's the extent in that sense to that. The churches then are linked together or joined together or work together by means of what we've just come to call ministries. So, Paul and Barnabas and Apollos and Timothy and those guys were moving in amongst the churches.
Hmm.
But I don't see anything in the scriptures that says that Timothy, for example, had an oversight over a whole number of churches. He
Hmm.
ministered to a whole lot of churches, but he didn't seem to have, authority over them.
You didn't say Paul had authority over his churches that he founded?
Well, again, the thought is his churches, or were they simply local churches? And he
Yeah,
certainly had
so
authority
he
because
called himself their father, right? Like he spoke about his
yes,
children,
yeah.
and saw himself as the father of those churches.
So he had that right, if you like, to
Hmm.
to instruct and to direct and to lead.
Hmm.
But he was also not such an authority that he controlled it.
Yeah,
So
and it was the word, the gospel that was the authority. Like he could also make a mistake, right? Like I think he was open to that. That he said like believe in this gospel that I'm teaching you, not any other gospel. He didn't say believe in everything I say, right? His argumentation was always like believe in this gospel.
yeah,
The one that I've handed on to you. You should believe in the same
hold
one,
on
not
to
any new doctrine that comes from
yeah,
someone else. So it was always the fidelity of or the purity of the gospel that he was teaching.
yeah. So I suppose you could say that when Paul went to Jerusalem, he didn't have the same standing or the same recognition or the same authority that he had, for example, in Corinth.
Hmm. Yeah.
And one understands that. And
He
again,
checked in as well with I think it
check
was
in with the guy.
with the
Yeah.
apostles and said like, "Hey, are we on the same page? Do we believe the same thing?" And they were like, "Yes, yes, good. Okay, we're all aligned," kind of thing. So that complete alignment was important.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there was agreement, there was working together.
Yeah.
Um, but we just see a much flatter structure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think from the Bible it can be hard to tell. I would say that in order to see what happens, as we spoke about last time, like the Bible doesn't really describe church practice so much. So
No.
there are other documents that describe that. And so what I'm wondering, Dad, is like so you said like you're very concerned and skeptical about Constantine and what happened in 325 when, like Christianity became far more institutionalized and aligned with the empire. But I'm curious how much you've looked into, or I don't know, yeah, like or why you haven't looked more into maybe the like texts and writings from before Constantine. I don't know if you want me to. I've found a couple that I can mention to you, but I don't know if you want to dive into it or not.
Yeah, I'll have a look. But again, I just already see that in the book, in the books that are written for us, there's already warnings.
Hmm.
For example, John writes about Diotrephes wants to have the preeminence among you. So he won't receive people. He won't do this. He's setting himself up as an authority. So it was already creeping in those early places. Um, and obviously the whole thrust of Paul writing to the Galatians with that Judaism was being pulled back into the churches. And Paul
Hmm.
warns against that. And he says, be careful of that. And so for me, one of the things that speaks about as far as Judaism is concerned is that's where the priests come from. And that's where this, priest, high priest structure comes from. And
Yeah.
I just feel that we have to be careful that we don't bring that same kind of structure again back into the Christian church.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say. And I think we'll talk about the priest issue another time because that's a whole other kettle of fish.
Yeah.
But obviously an important one, a vital one. Um, yeah, so I think for me the question is just like what makes us better positioned today to figure these things out than the people who actually sat at the feet of the apostles and listened to their teachings. Like, how can we be certain that we're the ones interpreting things based on, like a very selected little selection of books instead of looking at the full context of what was actually happening? Then, it's not like, so for example, the very first church history that was written by a guy called Eusebius. Sorry, I just need to, someone's calling me, so I need to hang up here. Um, he wrote it in 311 actually, so it's quite later, but still within two generations or two and a half generations.
Mm,
And he documented many things about like the way the church, what happened, and the way authority structures were, and who succeeded or something like that. So it's like it's from him we know that Saint Mark was the first bishop of Alexandria, for example. Um, and that's widely recognized. It's not normally seen as problematic, or there's several different sources that will confirm that say that the evangelist Mark became the first bishop of Alexandria. You would call it maybe overseer. The obviously they would have used the Greek word, which was which is the biblical
mm,
word, right? Which
yeah, yeah.
episkopos, I think it is, right? So
Hmm.
so just like and then we have letters from people who like Saint Clement was I think the second uh, bishop of Rome. He wrote a letter to the church in Corinth already in like the year 110 115, something like that. We have a guy called Saint Ignatius who was one of the first people who were he was a Christian bishop from Antioch, and he was taken to Rome and given to the lions. And he wrote letters to several churches. I think we have like 8 or 9 letters from him. He wrote also a letter to a guy called Polycarp, who I think was one of the disciples of Saint John the theologian. So we have these documents as well. The letter of Clement was actually on the list of some people wanted to include it in the Bible, and
Hmm.
then it was decided, no, let's not put it in the Bible because he's not quite there, with the apostles. But it was
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was very it was written about the same time as Saint John wrote the book of Revelation, right? So very close by, and but not quite the same authority. So it's certainly not the same weight, but it,
yeah.
it gives context and it gives more understanding of practice. And obviously, things did change, right? Like some things did evolve and and change in
and
time
change. Yeah.
in the way the church did stuff. And so we get a more full picture from those writings.
Yeah, a more full picture maybe is again a perspective. I would say that whatever we read about in the New Testament, there were just bishops in towns. I don't see that there was the first bishop or the second bishop or
No,
just
but
the
people
bishop.
they appointed a bishop like when one bishop died, then like I don't think any of the bishops died in the New Testament. None of the apostles even died in the New Testament, right? We don't even have Paul's death in the New Testament. But like wouldn't you say the natural thing to have done would be to appoint a new one when someone dies?
I would rather say a new one gets raised up than a new
Yeah.
one gets appointed. I think there's a slight difference.
Well, certainly the practice for most of the church's history has been that like it's the parish that uh selects. It's there's been different practices that have happened
Yeah.
at different times, but yeah.
And they are very different because even when Paul writes to, Timothy and Titus about ordaining elders,
Hmm.
he kind of that responsibility seems to be in their hands. It doesn't seem to be as much uh, a recognition of the people, except when when you write about the qualifications of them, then they must be well
Yeah,
received and well understood and well respected.
absolutely.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so ordination has been something that I mean, I think all churches do that some to a certain extent, right? Like,
Mm.
we see even, using lot to choose the first deacons, right? But of course they all qualified.
Yes.
Um, and so there are men who are appointed to or raised up or ordained. I don't know does ordained mean called out or something like that. Like I think you should see it as something like a heavenly calling, like a divine
Yeah, I think
person.
it's both. It's both the call and the recognition.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And normally there's a laying on of hands that happens, and I think
Yes,
you guys do that as well, right?
absolutely.
And
Yes.
and prayer,
Yeah.
and so um, and so I think these things are necessary for human organization, right? That there's people who have positions and who have that, and then to understand the extent and how to do it, I don't know. I would just choose to look at the early church as much as possible, like to look at those first, especially those first 300 years, because I can understand the skepticism of what happens when empire comes in.
Yeah.
The first years of the Byzantine Empire, terrible things happened in the Byzantine Empire, and people have been buying and selling bishops' places and stuff like that, right?
Yes.
Um, but especially those first years, these were people who had come through great persecution, right? And were willing to go to death for their belief in Christ. Those
Yeah.
were the people who held those overseer places at that time.
Yeah. So I don't have any problem with there being overseers and people being,
Mhm.
but I always see them as being plural. Don't see them
Mhm.
as being a bishop over, a area or even a bishop in a over a town.
Yeah.
It's there are bishops in the town, and it seems to me as if it doesn't go beyond that.
So in Nicaea, which is this is the year 325, the first time that it's the very first church council after what one could say Jerusalem, where they spoke about
Oh,
circumcision, was the
yeah.
first church council, right? In
Yeah.
Nicaea, then there's these canons that they decide on, and so Canon 6 at Nicaea, um, I can read it up here. It says, "Let the ancient customs in Egypt, Libya, and Pentapolis prevail, that the bishop of Alexandria have jurisdiction in all these, since the like is customary for the bishop of Rome also. Likewise, in Antioch and the other provinces, let the churches retain their privileges," and so on and so on. So it starts by saying, let the ancient customs prevail. And then it talks about
Hmm.
having a bishop in a big major city and him having some kind of authority over the area around there as well. And it's not referred to, like the clear understanding is like this is something that we're not inventing something new, but we're confirming what the church has been doing for the first 300 years of its existence.
I certainly chew hard on it because, as I say, I just see Paul saying ordain elders in churches, and there
Yeah.
isn't seem to be a chief elder. There isn't a
So
an
the
elder
role of
region.
bishop changed as far as I understood. So some people have had this idea that the bishop replaced the apostle, right? So like bishop, instead of apostles, now we have bishops. And as far
Almost,
as I
yeah.
can understand, so Saint Ignatius, he often talks about bishops. And as far as I understand, he says, no, the bishop isn't the apostle. It's something
Mm,
else.
mm,
It's a different kind of role than what the apostles were, kind of like a one of a kind thing. When the authority that they had, that was a one of a kind thing. The thing with bishops is that it's a position of power that, like it's a hierarchical job in an earthly hierarchy, which provides power and it's dangerous,
mm,
right? And
yeah.
so I think that the difference as well, Dad, between the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church is that in the Roman Catholic Church, that earthly hierarchy, with the summit being the Pope, has
Mm,
the possibility to actually change doctrine and has
yes.
changed doctrine in many, many ways, coming
Hmm.
to very extreme points. Even today, you look at some very weird, strange stuff happening in the Roman Catholic Church. Whereas in the Orthodox Church, we really just see the Pope as the first Protestant. For us, he was the first one who decided to take that upon himself, that he could interpret Scripture himself. Whereas for
Mm,
us, it's the saints, the very first people who read the Scriptures. They're the ones who kind of interpreted the Scriptures, and that's fixed, and we can't change it today. And
hmm.
so when we want to understand scriptures today, we don't say, well, what do I think? We say, well, what did the saints, what did, the very first church fathers, how did they understand this in the full context of how they were reading it? Um, and it can't be changed. And so earthly decisions and politics, that's terrible in
Can't change it.
orthodoxy. I mean, look at what's happening in Ukraine and all kinds of stuff, right? It's a horrible
Hmm.
big mess, and there's all kinds of ethnic divisions and stuff like that because earthly hierarchies are very corrupted and broken.
Yeah,
But we
yeah.
believe that there is an unbroken, pure kind of transmission of the gospel that's pure and unbroken right from the beginning. Um,
Yeah, so I think, and nobody would argue that one, that there's an unbroken transmission of the gospel because the gospel is the gospel.
mhm.
It's the application and the outworking of that maybe we have some different understandings about.
Well, also the details of it as well. Like, so is Christ uncreated or is he not, right? You'll find plenty of people who call themselves Christians who would tend towards Unitarianism or tend towards Arianism or something like that, right? People who call themselves Christians but have novel understandings of God that didn't exist in the first, second, and third century. Like they'll
Mm,
understand God in a different way and they'll practice their faith in a very, very different way as well, right? And so but they actually have like dogmatic differences of what God is, which are important, I think, which are these are like important differences. Like you know what is baptism? What is the Eucharist? What are these? These as soon as you go into like what is salvation even as well? Like if our understanding of what salvation is wrong, then it doesn't mean that I'm condemned to hell. Like
mm,
one of the questions I asked you a long time ago, which really helped me a lot, was I asked you like, well, what about a Muslim child that grows up in Afghanistan and like has no opportunity of ever hearing about anything from anyone except for like Muslim fanatics, dogmaticists or whatever. Will
yeah,
God then judge that child to hell? And you said, well, I don't know. And I think that's for me that's also like like each of us are, even me myself, I've received an impure transmission of an understanding of God, but I'll be judged according to what I've received, not according
yeah,
to yeah something else, right?
yeah. Not according to some rule or regulation that somebody has set up.
Yeah.
And also, the Lord Jesus, when the little children were brought to him, he said, no, when the disciples wanted to keep them away, he said, no, if such is the kingdom of heaven. So, yeah, okay, we could say, well, those were very specific Jewish children, and that might well be the case if you want to look at the doctrine of it. But if you look at the principle of it, then to me, that's what God is saying. Children who haven't had an opportunity to see anything or hear anything or be directed, they're not yet responsible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I believe that God sees that and He knows that, and I don't know that. I'm not
Yeah.
going to make that call. I'm leaving that to Him to make.
Exactly. And so what we're doing is a little bit of a dangerous thing now, right, Dad? Because we're sharing our more deep deep, heartfelt convictions and understandings
Yeah.
with each other. And I guess it puts a requirement on both of us to listen and understand better and to make sure we're not, as you said, like doing one-upmanship or trying to beat the other down, but like
Yeah.
lovingly saying like, yeah, here's how I see it. Can you see it as well? Or something like that.
So again, looking at the heart of the matter, I think that
Mhm.
we're on the same understanding when we look at the heart of the matter. When we come to the application of the things, then we see it slightly differently.
Yeah.
And is that sufficient for us to now have big arguments and fights and, split families because of that kind of thing? And my heart is no, that's not what it's about.
Mhm.
Yeah, there was a time when Paul had to speak rather sternly to Brother Peter because of what was going on with the Gentiles and so on. But
Mhm.
man, even though there was a bit of serious discussion about it, there was nevertheless an openness and a heart to say, okay, let's see what is the gospel really all about.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about is this wonderful gift of this ministry of reconciliation between God and man.
Yeah. Yeah. We had a conversation in a small group of guys the other day where some of the guys were like, "Oh yeah, don't worry about talking to your dad about this kind of stuff because it's just going to create conflicts and problems and he's going to freak out anyway and he doesn't understand philosophy and stuff like that." Some of the guys were saying, and luckily there were some of the guys that said like, "Hey, watch out for that kind of thing because in reality, if you go and you try and tell other people about God and about Christ and about the church and it's causing conflicts, then what's actually happening is it's your ego that you're using to try and dominate other people and feel better about yourself by doing that. Because when we share Christ, we're not just sharing some kind of idea that has to be like kind of planted in their head, right? What we're
Yeah,
doing is
absolutely.
really sharing a spirit of reconciliation and hope and belief and joy. And I think that's the important part of it that we need to be doing, not just yeah, and that's hard. That's difficult because we're intellectualized in our society today. I grew up being thinking like, like all success in life comes from, getting university education and achieving and, mathematics and science and stuff like that. And I've come to learn, well, no, it's actually not the case. And I think that's been a big shift maybe between our generations, right, Dad? Like the kind of academic edifice has collapsed to a certain extent in the last generation.
Yeah, and yet it hasn't because it seems as if there's still a very big emphasis on that. It's that whole academic concept in the world anyway that seems to have the dominance.
Mhm.
Whereas, we've seen, and particularly since your conversion, if I might call it that, there's been more of a heart understanding, and
Mhm.
that's really what I believe it's all about. It's a heart understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, Dad, thank you so much for diving into exploring and trying to talk about the things of the heart. It's not easy to do it with a audience on as well. But
Yeah.
I really hope that and I think I've heard from a lot of people that this has been useful and productive for them as well. So I appreciate you taking the time and let's see if we can maybe have I guess we'll continue with we at least have to talk about the priests there as well, right? See if we can get into that as well.
Yeah, so thank you for your understanding and for allowing us to chat about these things. I think it's very beneficial for us, I trust, and also for the world.
Thanks. Okay.
Thank you. All
Bye.
right. See you.